28-year-old single mother Vanessa Williams had a smile that could light up a room.
Whoever did this wanted to make sure that she suffered.
But would her savior eventually become her downfall?
What do you do when the person who promises to protect you becomes the person you need protection from? Vanessa Williams was 28 years old, working as a medical assistant while studying to become a therapist. She wanted to help people heal. On the night of April 18, 2015, someone stabbed her 23 times and left her body in a ditch in Fayetteville, North Carolina. The brutality was personal, the violence was calculated, and the man who reported her missing the next morning had been the last person to see her alive. The events leading to this moment started on an ordinary evening when Vanessa sat at home studying, trusting the man who said he would keep her safe from everything. Thank you for being here with me. Before we continue, drop a quick comment for me. What are you doing while you listen? Driving, working, or winding down? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. A quick note. This story includes some recreated details to convey the documented events. What matters most is the lesson it carries. Vanessa Williams studied how to heal people who couldn't heal themselves, unaware she was one of them. It was an ordinary weeknight in early 2015, and she sat at her kitchen table in Delray Beach with a therapist textbook open beside her medical assistant scrubs. The pages were dense with theory about recognizing when someone needed help, about seeing the signs of danger others missed. She wanted to be the person who helps others put themselves back together. The dream had been on hold for years, first through teenage motherhood, then through the string of relationships that never quite became what she hoped. But tonight, finally, it felt within reach. Vanessa Williams. 28 worked days as a medical assistant and studied nights to become a therapist. A single mother with a textbook open on her kitchen table and her first love's name tattooed on her neck. The tattoo, Nate, was still there from high school, a permanent mark from the boy who'd become the father of her son. That relationship had crumbled under the weight of teenage parenthood, but she'd kept believing, kept looking. After Nate came other men, other promises, a 3-year relationship that turned toxic, brief connections that fizzled. Each time, she thought maybe this one would be different. And then came John Chapman, military veteran and Vanessa's boyfriend since 2011, who presented himself as the strong protector she had been searching for her whole life. He was young, fit, knew how to carry himself, a man who'd served his country, who looked at her and said the words she'd been waiting to hear. I can protect you. For the first time in years, she felt steady, safe, like maybe all the disappointment had been leading here, to someone who would finally stay. The coastal quiet of Delray Beach settled over the house. Her son was asleep. The textbook waited. Tomorrow she'd work her shift at the clinic, then come home to study again, building towards something better. Small steps, but they were hers. Remember how safe she felt tonight. She studied the chapter on recognizing trauma, on understanding when someone couldn't cope alone. The signs were there on the page. Isolation, control, the slow erosion of self. She could name them all in theory. What she couldn't see was that the same signs were already forming in her own life. In the relationship she thought would finally be the one that lasted, John's protection had started to feel less like safety and more like a tightening grip. The questions about where she'd been, the comments about who she talked to, the moments when his calm exterior cracked into something darker. But she didn't see it yet. Or maybe she saw it and hoped it would change. She closed the textbook as the evening stretched late. Somewhere in the weeks ahead, Her name would shift from a student hoping to heal others to a case file documenting how the person who promised to keep her safe became the reason she would never finish that degree. The man who promised to protect her from everything would be the last person to see her alive. The call came in just after 9 in the morning on April 19, 2015. A local resident, driving past a roadside ditch in Fayetteville, North Carolina, spotted what he initially thought was discarded clothing. When he stopped to look closer, he realized he was staring at a human body. The deputies who arrived found Vanessa Williams face down in the shallow ditch, her body cold to the touch. She had been dead for hours, possibly since the night before. What struck them immediately was the violence of the scene. 23 stab wounds covered her face, neck, and back, a level of brutality that spoke not just of murder, but of rage. This wasn't a random act. This was personal. The medical examiner would later catalog each wound with clinical precision. But the deputies already knew what they were looking at. Someone had wanted Vanessa to suffer. Someone had made sure she would never speak again. Days later, detectives sat across from John Chapman in an interview room. He had reported Vanessa missing the morning her body was discovered, claiming she never came home the night before. Now, with confirmation that his girlfriend was dead, John appeared devastated. His voice broke at the appropriate moments. His hands trembled when he spoke her name. But something about his demeanor unsettled the detectives. He seemed devastated. Yes, but also strangely unsurprised, as if he had been expecting this exact conversation. As if he had already rehearsed his grief. Who mourns and redirects in the same breath. Because within minutes of expressing his sorrow, John shifted seamlessly into investigator mode. He had a theory, he told them. He had a name, Stuart Bird. Vanessa's ex-boyfriend of 3 years was the first name John gave to police. Stuart had never gotten over the breakup. John explained. Stuart had been jealous, possessive, unable to accept that Vanessa had moved on. The detectives took notes. They asked follow-up questions. John answered each one with remarkable specificity, providing addresses, timeline details, relationship history. He was perhaps the most helpful witness they had ever interviewed in a homicide investigation. Too helpful, some would later say. Most people, when confronted with the murder of someone they love, can barely form coherent sentences. They're drowning in shock, paralyzed by disbelief. They don't volunteer suspect names with such precision. They don't construct narrative arcs that point cleanly away from themselves. But John did. With calm clarity, he built a case against Stuart Bird while the detectives listened and wrote everything down. It would take them weeks to realize what they were actually hearing, not the testimony of a grieving boyfriend, but the performance of a guilty man. A performance so carefully rehearsed that he couldn't help but overplay his hand. The most helpful person in the room had the most to hide. He gave them a name that night. It wasn't his. Stuart Bird. The name sat at the center of the detective's notes, circled twice. But while they built a file on the man John Chapman had volunteered, the crime scene was speaking in a different language. The ditch where Vanessa Williams was found had a story to tell, but only some of it was being heard. The deputies had secured the perimeter. Now the investigators who processed the scene understood that physical evidence tells its story slowly, in pieces that only make sense later. They photographed the body, then turned to what surrounded her. No blood pooling beneath the body. She had been killed somewhere else and brought here, dumped in a location remote enough that hours could pass before anyone noticed. But whoever left her had also left clues. A tire indentation marked the grass near the ditch, deep enough to suggest weight. Near Vanessa's body, a single flip-flop lay in the dirt, its mate nowhere to be found. A wooden-handled knife rested nearby, blade exposed. And most telling, a blood-soaked floor mat, the kind pulled from a vehicle's interior. The deputies bagged each item carefully. They documented the tire tread, measured the indentation, noted every object's position. They understood what they were holding. Pieces of a vehicle that had been here, that had carried Vanessa's body, that belonged to someone, but they didn't yet know whose. "Does this belong to the victim?" one deputy asked, holding the bagged floor mat to the light. The blood had soaked through completely. This wasn't spatter, this was immersion. Evidence is a language that speaks only to those listening for the right words. By afternoon, Vanessa's body had been transported to the medical examiner's office. The medical examiner conducting Vanessa's autopsy noted lividity, stab wounds, and the toxicology finding that would redirect the entire investigation. 23 wounds on the face, neck, and back. Defensive marks on the hands. Based on lividity, she had been dead approximately 24 hours. Then came the toxicology report. Flocka, a synthetic street drug known for causing violent, erratic behavior. The drug was in Vanessa's system at the time of her death. The medical examiner called the lead detective with the finding. "The drug angle fits," the detective said. "We need to look at her recent contacts. This could have been a drug deal gone wrong." It was a logical theory. Flocka was associated with unpredictable violence, with transactions that turned deadly, with a world where 23 stab wounds made sense. The drug in her blood suggested a motive, a direction to follow. But logic built on a false premise is still just a detour. The drug finding would pull investigators in the wrong direction for days, but the objects left behind were already telling the truth. The floor mat, the flip-flop, the tire mark in the grass. 3 objects that belonged together but were found apart. The floor mat and the flip-flop were already pointing at a truck no one had found yet. But first, they would follow the name John gave them. Stuart Bird's name lit up the screen with the kind of record that makes detectives lean forward. The detectives ran his file within hours of John Chapman's interview. What came back looked like the answer they needed. Burglary, domestic strangulation, grand theft, child abuse. A rap sheet that stretched back years, each charge heavier than the last. And at the center of it, a 3-year relationship with Vanessa Williams that witnesses described as volatile, physical, and toxic. Domestic strangulation, one detective said, reading from the screen. Grand theft, child abuse. This guy has a history with her. John said Stuart attacked Vanessa before, another added. The pattern fits. Bring him in. On paper. Stuart Bird was perfect for this murder. A man with a documented history of violence against women. A man who had put his hands around throats before. A man who had dated the victim and, according to John, never gotten over the breakup. Every box checked. Every red flag waving. They brought him in the next morning. Stuart sat across from the detectives in the interview room. His posture defensive, but not evasive. They walked him through the relationship with Vanessa. The breakup. The arguments that followed. He didn't deny any of it. Did arguments get physical, he said? Yeah. But that happens sometimes. The admission hung in the air. The detectives exchanged glances. He wasn't running from his past. That could mean confidence or guilt, depending on what came next. Where were you the night of April 18th? They asked. At work, Stuart said. I was at work all night. Call my supervisor right now. How many hours do you lose to the loudest suspect? The detectives made the call. They spoke to Stewart's employer, verified the shift schedule, checked the time cards. Stewart had clocked in at the start of his shift and clocked out at the end. He had been exactly where he said he was, surrounded by coworkers, under the kind of surveillance that leaves no gaps. His employer confirms he was definitely there, the lead detective said, hanging up the phone. All night, Stewart leaned back in his chair. He knew what that meant. So did they. The record was ugly. The alibi was airtight. Square one. The perfect suspect on paper became an impossible suspect in reality. Every charge in Stewart's file had made him look guilty. Every minute of his work shift made him innocent. John Chapman had given them a name that pointed away from the truth, and they had spent days following it while the real evidence sat waiting. The floor mat, the flip-flop, the tire indentation, all of it still sitting in evidence bags while detectives chased the man with the worst record instead of the man with the cleanest story. The investigation needed a new direction. Vanessa's parents, an hour away in Miami, still grieving the daughter who stopped calling, held the memory of the last time they saw her alive. She was driving a white truck, they told detectives, said it belonged to a friend, Corey. That was the last time we saw her. The name gave investigators something to chase. Corey Summers. Within hours, they tracked him down, a long-haul trucker who had known Vanessa, who had helped her out while he was on the road. The kind of friend who lends his truck and his apartment to someone in need. We need to find Corey Summers, the lead detective said. They brought him in the next day. Corey sat across from the detectives and answered every question without hesitation. He explained the arrangement plainly. Vanessa had needed a place to stay and a vehicle to use while he was gone for days at a time. He traveled for work, hauling loads across state lines, and his apartment sat empty during those stretches. He had offered both. I let her use my truck, Corey said. I was on the road for days. When I got back, it was gone. When did you get back? The detectives asked. April 17th. He said, I'd been in Georgia for a run, got home late that night, and found my place ransacked. Vanessa was gone. My truck was gone. His truck was gone. So was she, and no one connected the two. Corey pulled out his phone and showed them the police report he had filed. Vehicle stolen. Apartment burglarized. The report was dated April 17th, 2015. 2 days before Vanessa's body was found in the ditch. He walked them through the timeline without prompting when he left, when he returned, what he found when he walked through the door. My apartment was a mess, Corey said. Drawers pulled out, things thrown around. I thought she'd been robbed. The detectives made the calls. They verified the trucking company's dispatch logs, confirmed the Georgia delivery dates, pulled phone records that pinned Corey hundreds of miles away during the window when Vanessa was killed. Every piece of his story checked out. He had been exactly where he said he was, doing exactly what he said he was doing, with documentation to prove it. His phone puts him in Georgia the whole time, the lead detective said. He's clear. They cleared the man. They forgot the truck. The correct object, the truck with the blood-soaked floor mat. The matching flip-flop was sitting in plain sight inside an alibi that cleared its owner. Corey Summers had given them everything they needed. A stolen vehicle, a timeline that placed the theft right before the murder, a description that matched the evidence bagged at the crime scene. But because Corey himself was innocent, they moved past him without holding on to what he had lost. The audience could feel it. The room couldn't. With 3 cleared names and nowhere left to turn, the detectives brought in the last person close to Vanessa, Nate Tyler. The first love, whose name Vanessa still wore tattooed on her neck. looked like the last lead left before the case went cold. Nate sat across from the detectives and spoke openly about their history. High school sweethearts, the father of her son, a relationship that had evolved into something different but remained connected by their child, and a mutual respect that outlasted the romance. "We stayed close for our son," Nate said. "She was a good mom." The detectives asked the familiar questions. "Where were you the night of April 18th? Who can confirm it?" "I was visiting friends that weekend," Nate said. "You can check." They did. The phone records came back, placing him hours away from Fayetteville, surrounded by people who would vouch for every hour. Another alibi, another dead end. The pattern was exhausting. "Phone records put him hours away," the detective said. "He's clear." 3 times. 3 alibis. Stuart Bird at work. Corey Summers in Georgia. Nate Tyler visiting friends. Every man from Vanessa's past accounted for. Documented. Eliminated. The room felt like a closing door. The case felt like it was dying. The detectives thanked him for his time. The interview was over. Then Nate said something that changed everything. Things weren't going well with John. "Her boyfriend," Nate said. "She'd been telling me he was abusive." The detectives stopped. They looked up from their notes. "What kind of abuse?" one asked. "Threats, stalking, verbal abuse, beatings." Nate said, "I saw him lose it once. Threw furniture. Got violent. It was shocking. Came out of nowhere." "She told me she was trying to get away from him." John Chapman, the grieving boyfriend who
I was afraid something like this might happen.
the helpful witness who volunteered Stuart Bird's name within hours of learning she was dead. The man who sat across from these same detectives days ago and cried at the appropriate moments while steering them toward an ex-boyfriend with a record. The alibis didn't end the case. They pointed it home. The detectives looked at each other. When was the last time they had actually spoken to John? When was the last time they verified where he was, what he was doing, whether his grief was real or rehearsed? Had they ever checked his story the way they checked everyone else's? When we try to reach John Chapman, the lead detective said after making the call, "He's not answering his phone." The room shifted. The helpful witness who had given them so much suddenly became the person they needed to find. The man who had pointed them away from himself had just disappeared. The false breakthrough became the real hinge the protector's story started to invert. Every man in her past had an alibi. The man in her present had just stopped answering his phone. The detectives went looking for him the moment Nate's words sank in. The empty doorway where John Chapman should have been standing told detectives everything they needed to know. "He's not home," one said, knocking a second time on the door that should have opened. No answer at the door. They tried his workplace next. The employer hadn't seen him in days. No call, no explanation, no warning. John had simply stopped showing up the moment the investigation shifted from Stuart Bird back to open questions. His desk sat empty. His shift went uncovered. Employer says he hasn't been to work in days. The detective reported back. They called his phone. It rang once, then went to voicemail. They called again. Same result. Again. Voicemail. Each unanswered ring louder than the last. Each silence more damning than any confession. "Every call goes straight to voicemail," the lead detective said. "He's running." Flight is evidence before it becomes proof. When a person suddenly becomes impossible to find, the silence speaks louder than any alibi. John Chapman had sat across from these same detectives days earlier, his voice breaking at the right moments. his hands shaking when he spoke Vanessa's name, offering them Stuart Bird's record like a gift. Now he was gone, vanished the moment they started asking the right questions. Within hours, the APB went out across Palm Beach County. John Chapman, wanted for questioning in the murder of Vanessa Williams, armed and dangerous. His photo circulated to every unit, every patrol officer, every dispatcher monitoring the frequencies. The net was wide. But the question remained, where had he gone? But the detectives remembered something else, something that had been sitting in plain sight since Corey Summers walked out of the interview room cleared. Corey Summers reported his truck stolen, one detective said. White pickup. Same weekend Vanessa disappeared. Connect it to the APB. Innocent men answer their phones. The pieces that had sat separate in evidence bags suddenly belonged together. John had vanished. Corey's truck had vanished. Vanessa had been found in a ditch with evidence of a vehicle no one had tracked. The timeline collapsed into clarity. John had access to the truck while Corey was in Georgia. John had been living with Vanessa in Corey's apartment. John had the means, the opportunity. And now, by his absence, the consciousness of guilt that flight always reveals. The dispatcher's voice came through an hour later. We have a location on that truck. The room snapped to attention. Every head turned toward the radio. Where? Parked in front of a residence, the dispatcher said. Registered owner, Corey Summers. Current location matches a different address. Female occupant. The truck everyone cleared with Corey's alibi was carrying the man who wouldn't answer his phone. The truck turned up in front of a house that belonged to another woman. The woman's name was Lana Palmer. Lana Palmer opened her door on the night of April 18th to find John Chapman standing there. And the first thing she noticed was the blood. When detectives arrived at her house following the truck, Lana sat down and told them everything. He showed up covered in blood, she said, driving a truck I'd never seen. It was after dark. John knocked on her door, and when she opened it, his clothes were soaked through. Red stains on his shirt, his pants, his hands. He looked panicked but trying to control it, trying to act like this was something he could explain. He said he'd been in a fight, Lana told the detectives. I could tell he was lying. With who, they asked. One of Vanessa's exes, he said, but his eyes wouldn't hold still. His story kept shifting with every breath. I told him to go shower, Lana said. I didn't know what else to do. She let him inside. He went straight to the bathroom. The water ran for a long time. Lana stood in her living room, listening to the pipes, staring through the window at the white pickup truck parked at her curb. The truck John had arrived in, the truck that didn't belong to him. She didn't ask whose it was. Part of her didn't want to know. Before revealing what John did after cleaning all the blood away, pause on this question. Why would someone destroy a SIM card at that exact moment, right in front of a witness? Comment your theory in one sentence. A quick note. What follows includes recreated dialogue for narrative clarity, though the documented actions and physical evidence remain fact.
Did arguments ever get physical?
Yeah, but that happens sometimes.
They could.
When John came out of the shower, changed into clean clothes, Lana watched him pull a phone from his pocket. He removed the SIM card and, without hesitation, tore it in half with his bare hands. Just ripped it. The small plastic card snapped between his fingers like it was nothing. He took a SIM card out of a phone and ripped it in half. Lana told the detectives. Just tore it. That's when I knew, she said. I told him to get out. The protector's own concealment. A SIM card torn in half became the thread that would hang him. Did he say where he was going? The detective asked. Lana shook her head. He didn't say anything. He just left, got in that truck, and drove away. She never saw him again. He tore the card in half. He couldn't tear the memory out of the woman watching him. The truck she'd seen at her curb was about to turn up in Miami with the inside painted red. Following Lana's account, investigators traced the truck south to Miami. The truck door swung open in a Miami apartment complex parking lot, and what was inside answered every question except where John Chapman had gone. "We've got the truck," the detective radioed in. "Miami, apartment complex off the highway." U.S. Marshals joined the manhunt, lending federal resources to track John Chapman as he moved through South Florida. They converged on the parking lot where Corey Summers' white pickup sat baking in the afternoon heat, exactly where the tip had placed it. When they opened the door, the smell hit first. Then the sight. Blood. Everywhere. "There's blood everywhere," one investigator said. This is where she was killed. It wasn't just drops or spatter. The blood had soaked into the seats, pooled on the floor mat, splattered across the interior surfaces. The entire cab was a crime scene, preserved in rust and red. Vanessa had died here, in this truck, stabbed 23 times before being dumped 30 miles away in a ditch. On the passenger side, a green purse sat untouched. "Green purse," an investigator called out. "Matches the description from her parents." The purse Vanessa had been carrying the day she disappeared. The one her family would recognize instantly, still sitting where she had placed it before everything went dark. And beneath the seat, almost hidden in shadow, a single flip-flop. The investigator pulled it out carefully, held it up to the light. The other detectives knew immediately what they were looking at. They had seen its match weeks ago, lying in the dirt beside Vanessa's body at the dump site. "This flip-flop matches the one at the dump site," the investigator said. "One flip-flop in a ditch. Its match in a truck 30 miles apart. One story. The floor mat we found in the ditch came from this truck," another investigator confirmed, comparing photos from the Palm Beach County crime scene. The evidence everyone had seen in Chapter 2 was always pointing here to a truck no one thought to chase. The blood-soaked floor mat that had been bagged as evidence at the roadside. The single flip-flop that seemed random, disconnected. The tire indentation in the grass. Every physical clue from the dump site traced back to this vehicle. Corey Summers' stolen truck, taken while he was in Georgia, used by John Chapman to kill Vanessa Williams and dispose of her body. "This is the murder scene," the lead detective said. "Now we just need him." The manhunt tightened. They had the vehicle. They had the evidence. They had the witness testimony. The circle was closing. The physical evidence catches up to the witness. The objects from the ditch and the objects from the cab tell the story Vanessa can no longer speak. Now they only needed the man. He was 3 blocks away, changing his clothes. Police fanned out from the truck, canvassing the area block by block, knocking on doors, showing John Chapman's photo, asking if anyone had seen this man, this face, in the past few days. A resident mentioned the homeless shelter 3 blocks away. "People came and went there," the resident said. "Might be worth checking." 3 blocks from where the blood-soaked truck sat, police found a homeless shelter, and inside it they found the man who had run out of places to hide. John Chapman was getting dressed when they walked in. The U.S. Marshals moved through the shelter quickly, identifying him before he could finish buttoning his shirt. "John Chapman," a marshal said. "We need you to come with us." John looked up. He didn't argue. He didn't try to run. He raised his hands without being asked. No resistance, one detective observed later. He knew this was coming. The protector who had cried at the right moments. who had pointed investigators towards Stuart Bird with such conviction, who had sat across from these same detectives and played the grieving boyfriend, now stood in a homeless shelter with his hands up, cornered with nowhere left to go. They placed him in handcuffs and walked him out to the waiting vehicle. The manhunt was over. The drive back to Palm Beach County took hours. John sat in silence in the back seat, staring out the window as Miami gave way to highway, then to the county where Vanessa had been found in a ditch, where this had all started, where it would now end. The interrogation room waited bolted table, metal chairs, walls that absorbed sound. The recorder sat ready on the table. The detectives had prepared for this moment since the night Nate Tyler said the words that flipped the case. John sat down across from them. The room was cold. The table was cold. Everything about the space was designed to strip away pretense, to make lying harder, to make the truth feel inevitable. "Do you understand your rights?" the detective asked. Reading them carefully, "Yes," John said. The detective paused, giving him space to ask for a lawyer. Most people in John's position would. Most people with a murder charge hanging over them would stop talking immediately. Let their attorney do the navigating. John didn't ask. "Do you want to tell us what happened?" The protector, cornered, is just a man pulling on his shirt in a shelter. A man who has run out of road has two choices: stay silent or speak. Some men lawyer up immediately, building walls of legal protection before a single word can escape. Some men sit in that cold room and calculate odds, weighing confession against denial, truth against strategy. John Chapman chose to speak. In the interview room, he did not stay quiet. The recorder turned on. The first word John Chapman said in the interrogation room was the excuse he would use for everything that followed. Drugs. "Let's start with what led to this," the detective said. "Drugs," John said. She was on her hands and knees, searching the carpet. He described going to Corey's apartment and finding Vanessa on the floor, picking at fibers, looking for flakes of flocka that might have fallen. Disgusted, he said. That's the word he used. He was disgusted by her addiction, by what she had become. They left the apartment. He bought her fast food. They drove toward Cape Coral. Somewhere along the way, the argument started. "What happened in the parking lot?" the detective asked. "She grabbed a knife," John said. He said she came at him. He said he had no choice. He said his military training kicked in, muscle memory, instinct, survival. "I believe she was possessed by some demon," John said. "My training kicked in." A demon. Not Vanessa. The woman he had lived with. The woman he had promised to protect. A demon. The word gave him distance from what he had done. Turned a person into a problem. A victim into a threat. The detective let him talk. Let him build the story brick by brick. Self-defense. Possession. Training. Each word a layer of justification for what came next. But stories built on lies have cracks that widen under examination. "You said you took the knife away from her," the detective said. "Then what?" John paused. The question hung in the air. "I snapped," he said. It was quick. It was insane. The detective says her name back to him. Vanessa. Not the demon. Not the drugs. Vanessa Williams was stabbed 23 times, the detective said. After you disarmed her. The number sat there on the table between them. 23. Not one defensive strike. Not two reflexive stabs in the heat of a struggle. 23 wounds, delivered after the knife was in his hands. after the threat, if there ever was one, had ended. Self-defense ends when the danger ends. Once John had the knife, Vanessa had nothing. She was unarmed. She was vulnerable. She was at his mercy. And he stabbed her 23 times. The self-defense story is the confession. The demon he described was the alibi. The knife count was the truth. The detective knew what those numbers meant. The medical examiner had documented every wound: face, neck, back, defensive injuries on her hands where she tried to block the blade. The kind of violence that doesn't come from fear. It comes from rage. John sat across the table. His story told. His excuses laid out. He had dressed murder as necessity, framed execution as survival. But the facts spoke louder than the framing. He said he took the knife away from her. Then he stabbed her 20 more times. The investigator let the silence sit for a moment. Then he leaned forward and asked the question that would dismantle everything John Chapman had just said. How many times do you defend yourself after the danger is disarmed? Once you took the knife, the investigator said, there was no threat. Self-defense doesn't cover what happened next. John shifted in his seat. The story he had built, the demon, the training, the snap was crumbling under the weight of his own admission. He had taken the knife from Vanessa. The moment he did, she became unarmed, vulnerable, at his mercy. And he stabbed her 23 times. The law is clear on this. Self-defense is a shield, not a sword. It protects you when you're in danger. But once the danger ends, so does the justification. Once John had the knife in his hands, Vanessa had no weapon. She had no way to hurt him. The threat was over, but he didn't stop. You admitted you started the fight, the investigator continued. That makes her the one defending herself. The reframe was surgical. John had confessed to initiating the physical altercation. He had admitted to being the aggressor in that parking lot, which meant that when Vanessa reached for that knife, she wasn't attacking. She was trying to survive. Vanessa was not the aggressor. She was the one who reached for the knife to survive. How many times do you defend yourself after the danger is disarmed? The question hung in the air. One stab, maybe reflex, panic, adrenaline coursing through someone who just disarmed an attacker. 2. Perhaps. In the chaos of a struggle. But 23. 23 wounds after you disarmed her, the investigator said. That's not defense, that's rage. The numbers told the story John couldn't spin. The medical examiner had documented every wound, face, neck, back, defensive marks on her hands where she tried to block the blade. The kind of injuries that come from someone fighting for their life against someone who wouldn't stop. The interrogation ended. John was charged with first-degree murder. The confession was recorded. Transcribed. Preserved. The evidence was catalogued. The truck with the blood-soaked interior. The flip-flop matching the one at the dump site.
John? Oh my God, what did you do?
Nate Tyler's account of the abuse Vanessa had endured. And at the center of it all, the number 23. The excuse couldn't survive its own arithmetic. Self-defense ends when the threat ends. John had admitted the threat ended the moment he took the knife. Everything after that, every stab, every wound, every second he kept going, was murder. A jury would sit with that number for 3 years before they answered it. 3 years passed. In a Palm Beach County courtroom in January 2018, the family who had held their breath since April 2015 sat in the gallery, waiting for the instant before guilty lands. Vanessa's family, who had waited 3 years for the word guilty to finally land in a courtroom, watched the jury file back in. The jury who deliberated on whether 23 stab wounds after disarming someone could ever be called self-defense had reached their answer. The courtroom was still. John Chapman stood. The foreperson spoke. "We find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder." The word hung in the air. Guilty. Not self-defense, not an accident, not a demon or drugs or military training. Murder. The jury had looked at the numbers, 23 wounds after he took the knife, and seen what those numbers meant. The silence in the courtroom was the sound of 3 years collapsing into a single syllable. For Vanessa's family, the verdict was an exhale after holding their breath since the morning a deputy knocked on their door to say their daughter had been found in a ditch. Justice had arrived, but it had not brought her back. The judge who would deliver the sentence that closed John Chapman's freedom for nearly half a century looked down from the bench. The evidence had been presented. The confession had been played. The witnesses had testified. Lana Palmer describing the blood. Nate Tyler describing the abuse. The medical examiner describing 23 wounds on a woman who had been trying to survive. "I sentence you to 48 years in the Florida Department of Corrections," the judge said. The gavel fell, and somewhere a boy grew a year older without her. 48 years. Nearly half a century. John Chapman would be an old man before he could ask to walk free. But no sentence could undo what he had done. No verdict could bring Vanessa home to her son, to her parents, to the people who loved her and would spend the rest of their lives carrying the weight of her absence. Justice is not the same as repair. A guilty verdict answers the question of who and why, but it doesn't heal the wound. Vanessa's family sat in that courtroom, knowing that the man who killed her would spend decades behind bars. They also sat knowing that she would never walk through their door again, never call on the phone, never laugh at a joke, or hold her son, or finish the degree she had been working toward. The protector who had promised to keep her safe became the person who took everything from her. And 48 years in prison was justice, but it was not return. 48 years. And still, no version of this ended with her coming home.
I believe that she was possessed by some demon.
Justice had been delivered. But justice does not erase. Outside the courthouse, where John Chapman was just sentenced, the case stands for something larger than one verdict: the danger that wears the face of safety. This is a story about intimate partner violence, but it didn't announce itself that way. It came dressed as protection. John Chapman positioned himself as Vanessa's protector, the man who would keep her safe from the world, from her addiction, from everything that could hurt her, and she believed him. Until the moment he killed her. The protector was the predator. That pattern is the oldest one in the book of how violence enters a home. It arrives offering help. It offers a place to stay, a shoulder to lean on, a promise that you're not alone. And by the time the mask slips, the door has already closed. The person who promised safety has become the greatest danger. Vanessa struggled with addiction. That's documented. The flocka in her system was real, but her addiction wasn't the reason she died. It was the tool he used to control her. John weaponized her vulnerability, used it to isolate her, to make her dependent, to position himself as the only person who could save her. Classic tactics of an abuser wearing the mask of a caretaker. And when she tried to leave, he made sure she never could.
You don't go back and plunge it 20 other more times in her chest after you take control of the knife.
It fit the toxicology, fit the chaos of the crime scene, fit the narrative that drugs lead to violence. But that theory was always a detour. The drug angle was always the lie the truth hid behind. Vanessa wasn't killed by strangers in a parking lot over a bad transaction. She was killed by the man she lived with, The man who reported her missing. The man who cried at the right moments and pointed investigators toward her ex-boyfriend, while the evidence of his guilt sat 3 blocks away in a homeless shelter. The danger that looks most like safety is the hardest one to see. That's the lesson this case leaves. Abusers don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the person offering shelter. Sometimes they sound like the voice on the other end of the phone checking in. Sometimes they present as concern, as care, as love, until they don't. Vanessa Williams was studying to become a therapist. She wanted to help people heal. She wanted to be the person who sat across from someone in pain and gave them tools to survive. She had dreams of finishing her degree, building a practice, making a difference in lives that needed it. She never got the chance. The man who said he would protect her from every danger in the world is the reason her name is in this record at all. But her name deserves to be remembered as more than that. The therapist textbook Vanessa Williams studied from still sits somewhere. Unfinished, a dream she never got to complete because the man who promised to protect her made sure of it. She wanted to be the one who helps people heal. That's who she was trying to become. A medical assistant by day, working with patients who needed care. A student by night, studying psychology and counseling. Learning how to sit across from someone in pain and give them tools to survive. A single mother with Nate's name tattooed on her neck, a reminder of her first love. The father of her son. The relationship that ended but left something beautiful behind. She believed, each time, that this relationship would be different. That this man would be the one who didn't hurt her. That the pattern could break. It didn't. Her son grows older each year without her. He started another school year this fall. Another birthday. Another milestone she won't see. He'll grow up with photos and stories. But not the voice on the other end of the phone. Not the laugh. Not the presence of the mother who wanted to build a better life for him. An hour south in Miami, her parents still hold the memory of the daughter who stopped calling. They had seen her just a week before she died, when she drove up in a white truck that didn't belong to her. They didn't know it would be the last time. No one ever does.
My army training kicked in. It's not an excuse to kill someone.
Why did she keep opening the door to men who hurt her? No file answers that. Maybe she thought she could fix them. Maybe she believed love could heal what was broken. Maybe she saw the best in people, even when they showed her the worst. Or maybe, like so many who find themselves trapped in cycles of violence, she didn't see the danger until it was too late to escape. The case files don't hold that answer. They hold facts. Names. Dates. Evidence. A verdict. They document what happened, but not always why. They tell the story of how Vanessa Williams died, but they can't fully capture how she lived. She lived as a woman, trying to build a better life, trying to be a good mother, trying to finish a degree that would let her help others the way she wished someone had helped her. She lived with hope that the next door she opened wouldn't lead to more pain.
They found him guilty of second-degree murder, and the judge sentenced him to 48 years in prison.
She wanted to be the one who heals. No one healed her. The one who swore to keep her safe is the one who didn't. He promised to protect her from every danger in the world except himself. That's where this story ends. Vanessa Williams wanted to be the person who helps others heal. She never got that chance. The man who promised to protect her became the very danger she needed protection from. This case stands as a portrait of intimate partner violence wearing the mask of a protector. The danger that looks most like safety is often the hardest one to see. When someone uses your vulnerabilities as tools of control. When they position themselves as your only shelter from the world. when they isolate you from everyone who might recognize what's happening. These are not acts of love. They are tactics of abuse. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need to hear them. Drop a comment below, share your thoughts, your perspective, or simply let me know you were here. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share it with them. Thank you for listening to Vanessa's story with the respect and attention it deserves. This case is based on real events, with some scenes recreated and dialogue dramatized to convey the documented sequence of what happened. My deepest respect goes to Vanessa's family and loved ones. Her memory deserves more than the crime that took her. She deserves to be remembered for who she was and who she hoped to become.